Greetings! Welcome to Terra Prime Live. Darth Anonymous coming to you from Terra Prime headquarters here. Got a little late start, but we are on with you now. We have a great show tonight. We're going to be talking about Form 5. So that is Shien and Djem. So with us today to help us talk about that, we have our friend Craig Page, and also joining us is Stephen Frick. Your school is what's your school over there in California?
No, my name is Stephen Fick. I run Davenport European Martial Arts School in Santa Clara, California. We actually just turned 21 this month.
Nice. Excellent. All right.
And let's not undersell it either. So this is probably the largest, HEMA school on the West Coast, I think, certainly in the state of California.
Yeah, I am actually one of the oldest full-time dedicated Western martial arts school in the world. I have one of the largest facilities in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've got an 8,700 square foot building with over 130 students. I have 4 instructors that work for me, and we run classes 6 to 7 days a week.
And the critical thing is you also teach a lightsaber course.
We do. Every Wednesday, we run a class that I call the Sun Sword, because I grew up in the 80s and I was a big fan of Thundar the Barbarian.
Oh, yes.
And I started calling it the Sun Sword because I figure Warner Brothers is more forgiving than the mouse. And I didn't want to get sued by the mouse.
Okay, I don't know that that's exactly true, but
so far we're all in good standing.
We're all on I'm all on the Thundar tip, that's for sure. That's a deep cut.
And Stephen, you have coached some fighters from the Saber Legion in the last couple of years?
I have worked with 2 of the top fighters in the country, David Lossinger and Alon, and I just blanked on his last name.
Block?
But yes.
Yes, he's been on the program before.
So they both study with me, or have. David currently studies with me. Alon did study with me before he moved out of the area.
Gotcha.
And I've had the privilege to coach them both when they were heading out to Minnesota for their big championships.
Nice. Very good. All right.
One of the things I just want to add real quick that I've really been looking forward to with this talk is Form 5 is a brutal, hard form. And I started in armor. So in 1989, I started fighting with bladed weapons and full armor. So for 34 years, I've been working in armor. I have 10 fingers, they all move, and I can count to 10. So I'm doing okay for 34 years of combat.
Yes. My partner Matt is old SCA guy. So the old bash the can style, where they go in there and full kit and everything like that. So definitely. Well, that's a good transition actually, because why don't we kind of unpack what we're going to be discussing here. Craig, can you give us a kind of overview of what the canon and media representation of Form 5 really is, because it gets a little hairy.
Yeah, Form 5 is where things get a little bit more advanced than the previous 4 forms. Form 5 is where you have 2 different distinct variations, but the general gist is Form 5 is the Perseverance form, also known as the Way of the Crate Dragon. I'm pretty sure they gave it that distinction because it is the form that has been widely associated with both Anakin and Luke Skywalker. It is known as the Skywalker form. There are 2 main variations, Shien and Djem. They are united by the principle of counterattack. As you know, you receive energy, you receive the attack, and then how best to reply. Shien, it is lore wise, it was developed a couple of millennia before the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire, by Form 3 users who wanted to be more proactive than just the static defense, which isn't a real thing, but they developed a form that allowed them to take the fight back to their attackers. Shien is said to have been developed first, which is most widely known for being able to return blaster bolts back to the person who sent them or to another target, and also for close-up defense. Djem, on the other hand, is focused more on dueling, where Makashi, and it was largely Form 2 that that the Sarisu users mixed in to make both Shien and Djem. So consider it's literally 3 and 2 make 5. And which, if that was intentional, I'm angry. For the pun. Djem is usually the form that we focus on because it is very much a lightsaber against lightsaber dueling and melee form. However, there have been various different attempts to translate Shien. I almost said Shicho. Translating Shien to a viable lightsaber style, because it unfortunately, most of the writing about Shien is how it does not it's been written more about what is different between Shien and Djem than what is Shien.
Yeah, most of the stuff I've read is like they only talk about the blaster deflection and moving blaster bolts back to the target.
And also, I would be loath by certain parts of the fandom if I did not mention that Shien is also widely popular for being associated as the underhanded form.
Yes.
I could have an entire conversation.
Ice pick grip.
I don't even have my saber with me. But yeah, it is widely associated through both Starkiller from Force Unleashed and Ahsoka Tano, who was Anakin's Padawan, as the underhanded form. But there's no real rule saying that that's how it is.
Yeah. There's not a lot on Shien other than that. Other than even in Jedi Path.
Yeah.
I actually have a funny story. It ties in really well to this underhanded grip.
Yes.
I didn't know this. One of the techniques I've worked with my guys in the Sunsword class is a transition from a two-handed forehand grip to a one-handed reverse grip. I didn't know that this was part of the form, but I was fencing against Alon after teaching him this and pulled it off on him with a stomach cut as I went past him. So I've used this in a fight against Alon.
So you were moving past him on the floor?
Yep.
Yeah, kind of like a kendo men cut. Yeah.
Yeah, but in a reverse grip as I went through.
Yeah. We so what I decided to expand on Shien when I got to Form 5 myself, because it had the least written about it, right? It gave me the most freedom for creativity and stuff. And I used primarily an art called Bagua Djem, which is based kind of on the barehanded art of Bagua, which is kind of a circular walking thing, but it uses a large sword. The interesting thing about Chinese two-handed swords is they're often light enough to also use with one hand. So many of the two-handed sword forms that you see, you'll see two-handed stuff all of a sudden going into a couple of one-handed things, going back into two hands, that kind of thing. And yes, there is an entire section in the form where you flip it around into reverse grip. But and I think and that your story kind of like underscores this. The way that it's used in reality is when you are very, very close, and it's usually a switching motion, right? It's like it's the act of going from forehand to ice pick. That's the important thing. The people that stand just holding it like this and try to hit you with it, you're giving up lots of reach. We have an entire video on all the problems that you do when you're trying to strike somebody with the
opening targets.
Yeah, I mean you're leading with the hand. It's just like, go ahead, hit me right here.
I have to say that transfer that you're talking to, the way I train my guys is that you can either do it as a descending or an ascending, and then you open up your hands to kind of slide like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you do it as an ascending defensive action, you set aside their cut with a transfer, allowing you to just walk right through.
Yes, another one we use it a lot in the Chinese system is if you're bound up and you bind in, you can then reverse. There's a lot of this kind of like flipping over because a lot of these techniques are taken directly from staff techniques, which we kind of alluded to last week with the with the Ming Dynasty manual that is entitled Staff or Sword Manual, but contains nothing but staff techniques.
Which is kind of, that brings us to an interesting question too, which is like, you know, real world weapons and then fantasy analogs of them, right? So Stephen, as you know, you think about Form 5, and I know in your school you guys teach just an immense range of Western weapons. Like, which Western weapons do you view as maybe being the best analog for the kinds of discussions that you'd have about Form 5?
The play of the lightsaber, because of the two-handed length of the handle for most of them, is mostly similar to the longsword. However, in my class, I teach a combination of longsword ideas from a manuscript written in the 15th century, but then when we transfer to one-handed, it is more akin to a 17th or 16th century manuscript written in Italy by a master called Achille Marozzo. And so Marozzo's manuscript, one-handed, we see similarities to the one-handed section in Fior della Berri's manuscript from 1409. So I kind of combine the two. And in a battle, if we look at the historical fights, the only direction you can safely move is forward because all your guys are behind you. And we're talking a melee, not a one-on-one fight necessarily, unless you're cornered in an alleyway or a hallway or something. The only safe place to move is forward. So all of the actions set aside the movements, giving you the abilities to control their strike, where they send it, as you're moving past them. And we see that in both manuscripts.
Yeah, that's very similar to because another thing about our Form 5 is our Form 5 is the culmination of our first four, right? So you go through your first form, with then those form your basics. And Shicho is devoted to that principle, right? Because it's based on battlefield sword where you're fighting in formation. You're not doing this. You're not necessarily going up with weapons of your same length. You're going pole arms, stuff like that. You have to traverse, and you're constantly trying to gain ground, right? You can't back up because, like you said, you've got a bunch of people behind you, you know, and yeah. So bringing that to bear here in Form 5, we have to talk about the dueling aspect because that's primarily what we do with the lightsabers. Although I am trying to get enough people involved in it that we can do some group formation stuff at some point, but we're working on it.
Going forward, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It is interesting what you were saying there, how well that actually worked with the lore about, the kind of the strong nature, but, the redirecting of attack. So kind of like your reading of of your manuals right there just kind of plays very nicely with the lore that comes from video games and comic books. And, we find that normally it doesn't. Normally it's really hard to connect those things.
Well, when people think dueling, currently, their most common thought is, I'm going to stay here and my hands are going to do things, but my feet don't move.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very difficult to control your upper body and your lower body. I tell all my guys a fight is like rubbing your head and patting your belly, right? While somebody's throwing rocks at your face.
Right.
So being able to control yourself and move your feet as well as your hands, the only direction you can safely go is forward. Because the safest place for you to hit somebody is in the back. Because they can't defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as you go past them, their body gets in the way of their own defense. And they lose measure. And then they have to turn around, which means they now lose time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely. So the difference between Shien and Djem, the way I kind of look at it, is almost like the way I'm taking it, right? What I'm using, Bagua over here, that's really academic, right? It's like, here, these are the things that we can do with this weapon, with our bodies, with movement and all of that. And and I'm glad you mentioned footwork, because it is reliant heavily on footwork. I think anybody who's done this for any length of time knows that the majority of this game is footwork. You can decide a match just on the quality of your footwork, but or whatever you do with it. But and then you have a little bit more focus when you get into the Djem thing. But we also talk about power, right? So we're talking, there's a lot of talk about and we talk about this too. The way that they're discussed in the media is almost like layperson's ideas of what real sword fighting is, right? Where people think the swords were heavy as hell, that you needed to be Hercules to wield them, that it was just smash, 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 right? So you get sort of like that, but there is something to a power and aggressive thing. I know in the German manuals, there's the initiative. If you don't have the initiative, take the initiative. If you have the initiative, take the initiative. Right.
We call that the vor.
Yes. Yep. And that's where Matt's Star Wars name Vornock comes from. Yeah.
So it's very interesting that you're talking about that kind of power. When you're moving forward and you're using your feet, you're no longer using only the strength of your arms. You're using the strength of your entire body. One of the things I like to tell new students when they come to me is Conan lied to us. It's not big dumb thugs throwing tire irons at each other. Right. It's a subtle art. And learning how to incorporate your entire body into the attack means you can continue both the offense and the defense for a longer period of time.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. The application of strength in any type of fighting art is always it's a specific type, because as you're fighting in any type of fighting, you have energy management to deal with, right? Because you are rapidly running out of oxygen and calories and all that stuff. And fighting is hard. It's very, very hard. Just look at how it takes it out of boxers after, just a few rounds, right? And that's one of the, first things that you learn when you start doing this stuff is learning how to breathe, learning how to do this. So producing power without a whole lot of effort is very, very important, right? And like you said, being able to continue that, right? To keep it up so that you don't, as we say, gas in the first, first few exchanges.
I'll ask my guys quite often, or remind them that, what if I'm not your first fight? Worse yet, what if I'm not your last?
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. It's not like a video game where it stops and then you get your full bar of energy back. All right.
It does take a little bit longer.
Yes.
That's why we play King of the Hill.
Let's see if we got any questions here. All right. You never want to turn your back on your opponent, correct? Generally speaking, good advice. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. However, like we were talking about with battlefield scenarios and stuff like that, one thing that you have to think about is that sometimes it's not up to you. Like sometimes they appear behind your back and you have to learn how to turn around and do that kind of thing. So it's not always about you and you turning your back on somebody else, right? But in life, sometimes somebody can get around you, and you have to learn how to kind of take, prevent that from happening as best you can. And then if it does happen in some kind of scenario, especially like in a battlefield scenario where you're in melee and there's lots of people all around, right? Hard to keep track of people, all that kind of thing. Lots of that kind of thing can happen. If you have a longer weapon than the other person has can get inside of that weapon, can do, whatever. But so yeah, never wanting to turn your back on your opponent, probably a good idea. Don't assume you know where that opponent is, but do you guys have drills or training about how to get people off of your back or just to prevent them from taking that, since that's obviously one of your strategies is to do that?
We have a game that we call the zombie game. And this is one or two people in a circle surrounded by everybody else. And everybody can attack you at the same time, but they move at zombie speed. Okay. And this teaches you how to use your footwork to continue your movement. But it's important to understand that, again, it's moving your upper and your lower body together. So the action of moving your sword in complete circles is not only the offensive action, but it can also be the defensive action against that guy behind you. Yes. And so all of these actions allow you to protect yourself as you're moving and changing the opponent's distance. Mm-hmm. I tell my guys, your job is not to be stronger and faster than the opponent. Your job is to make them weaker and slower than you. And that's done through angles and distance.
Yes. Let me see if we have anything else here.
And that would be like the classic misinterpretation, I think, of the discussions around Form 5. And like God only knows what, people are thinking when they're writing video game texts, which is that, to be strong means that you hit really hard with the sword, or you've got to be really strong to carry the sword, as opposed to, it's like, no, the sword is a giant lever. It's going to figure out how to hit hard on its own. The question is, what is the rest of you doing, right? And that's, like Stephen was saying, really where that question of strength is arising. Not that we're going to swing it like like Mickey Mantle here.
Right. That's an important distinction to make. And that full body power is something in our system that we, that is kind of like a prerequisite for this form. The stuff that you're doing when you're training it, like you said, moving your upper body and lower body together, learning how to put your body and your whole movements into every action, right? So there's no wasted movement. And there's lots of tiny little things that we could go in about with that, but
please go ahead, Craig.
Well, there's also something to be said about, and this might help some other people, but a lot of again, what you guys have been saying is that much of this has been people confuse it with raw force and strength. Like they all think they're going to be Andre the Giant fighting Wesley and the Princess Bride. They all think that that they have to just start throwing ham hocks. It isn't about the raw strength. It is the application of the strength that you have. And it is what strength you have and where you are putting it. You can do a lot. You can do a lot more with, you can do a lot more manipulating, a specific part than just overwhelming an entire system. It's one of the principles of jujitsu, which has some relevancy to the concepts of Djem and Shien, which is replying to an attack that has been freely given to you. It is very much, giving an attacker their receipt back. And you can do a lot more with your strength and your energy by focusing it in the appropriate places than just by shock and awe, which is not which a lot of people confuse in Djem and Shien, which is more of like the way a Taru would be, which is very much attacking from every angle and confusing, their perceptions and systems. One of the best things I like about, we were talking about, weapons and styles that that mirror Djem and Shien. One of those is actually this guy, the Tanfa, which I have a lightsaber version of because it deflects, and also any attacks that it does is focused and precise and requires on you getting inside another person's system and taking advantage, usually because they've already attacked. So just my 2 bits here from listening to you guys.
That actually brings up a thing I wanted to mention was people mistake strength with muscles versus structure.
Mm-hmm.
Your strength doesn't come from the size of your muscles, because no matter how strong you are, you're going to get tired. It comes from your structure. In the Fiore's manuscript, he uses his ice pick all the time, because in the medieval style, that's the way you grab your sword. But what's interesting is if I hold my knife like this, my wrist is flexible. But if I do this, I don't have that flexibility or that give, and that makes me stronger. And when you look at the manuscript, you can see his thumb and index finger slightly extended to lock the structure of the wrist in place. So it's important for people to make a distinction between strength coming from the muscles versus strength coming from the structure.
Yeah, I would say the scientific explanation of that would be your body is a reactive system, right? So everything that's going out of it is kind of coming in, right? So your muscles change the angle of your joints, and then they stabilize the angle of your joints, right? When you produce power into anything, what happens in your body is some version of this, where you will be relaxed until the point of contact. Your entire body will basically become rigid, and then all of the energy from that movement is going to go into the target. like a golf swing, any type of swinging motion, right? Swords, all of that. So when you're in there, this is why in martial arts you go, huh, because it's right. It gives you intra-abdominal pressure, all of that. So basically what it's doing is you're basically lining yourself up to have more inertia than your target. And, that comes from your structure, it's structure is also a tough word because a lot of people think that's static, right? And it's not, right? You're constantly moving from one position to the other to maximize that, so it's got to be a changing structure. That's really the challenge. But yeah, you're right. If you're just relying on your muscles, those will very, very quickly tire out, right? And a trick I use in class sometimes when people are using too much arm is I just have them, okay, we're going to just do 100 strikes here, right? And sooner or later, their arm, they won't move anymore, and they have to do it right. So.
Yeah, when I say structure, it's about learning to line up your joints in the strongest possible position for that angle that you're at. And when you do that, your strike is with the earth because you're connected to that and it's all pushed through.
Yep. Yes.
Learning how to develop that is where the art comes from.
Yeah, definitely. It's like the thing where you put a chair underneath a doorknob, right? The more you're pushing that open, the reason that works is because you're pushing the chair into the floor, right? The floor's not going nowhere. Same thing with you. If I'm hitting you with whatever and I'm in a good stance, then I have the earth behind me, right? The earth will not move. You will, right? And then we always say the ground never misses. So
that's right. The only weapon you always have with you.
Exactly. All right. Let's see. Do we have any other particular questions out there? Oh, yes. Here we go. Considering conservation of energy, would you recommend explosive starts to end fights quickly?
I have some thoughts on that as well.
Why don't we send it over to you first then?
So your choice to use that explosive start or not is completely dependent upon your observations of the opponent beforehand. Any fight that you're in is simply a conversation on the physical level. So you have to learn to listen to what they're telling you or asking you before your response. That explosive start can be a great idea, unless they have one too. Then you both are like two rhinos just butting heads.
Yes.
If I learn to read what's coming at me and to feel the energy, I can then choose to be explosive, to take the center, or to allow him to come to me and let him win the fight for me.
Right. Yes. So
I think I just froze.
Yeah, well, your video did freeze. We didn't lose your audio though, so we heard what you said. I agree 100%.
Okay, great.
Yeah, obviously, such to give specific advice like that, it's all going to depend on the situation. Some people may have a very good strategy against such a start, right? And that's their trick. That's the thing that they've got in their bag. You never know. So it can be good. And obviously we do want to end it as quickly as possible. The avenue to that end is probably going to be different each time.
I'm working on a book right now called The Secret Language of Conflict. I'm in editing for it. And this is reading body language within the fight. And if I can read their body language in the fight, I know where they can and cannot go before they do, because I read their intention and their balance. and then I can be where they're not.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And sometimes that requires explosive starts. Sometimes it doesn't.
Great.
He's not here right now, but we should represent Anthony, who loves to say in these conversations that, you know, you fight the structure, right? Meaning that you identify the other person's structure, you identify what they can do with their structure, and that you know, that's what you're fighting. You're fighting against their structure. And so first you got to be able to read that structure.
Yeah, it's true. We have a question here that let's see, what do you do when you get lost in the flow of the opponent? Or how do you stop getting lost in the flow of battle? I'm not exactly sure what he's referring to. Are you getting confused in a point when you're sparring with people, or are you, can you be a little more specific with that question? I'm not certain what they're asking. Does anybody have any idea, Mike?
If I'm gonna take a guess, I think it has something to do with like getting overwhelmed by what the other person is doing. Basically, how to keep your head about you. If I had to
Okay.
guess.
I think it might be that, or you find yourself following the other person.
Okay.
And you're following them. I was in a rapier and dagger tournament with a good friend of mine, international rapier and dagger tournament, and I was fighting rapier, dagger. He was fighting small sword. He had a shorter range than me, but he was significantly faster because of the weapon he had. I found myself chasing his small sword with my dagger, which is exactly what he wanted me to do, because that was going to give him the opening to be able to stab me. So I broke that flow by breaking distance. The only time that you can safely think while fighting is out of distance. If you find yourself starting to follow somebody else's flow and you're falling into their time, break distance. And it doesn't need to be backwards, because backwards is one of the most dangerous directions you can move. If they're right-handed, move to their left side, because then they need to cross their body or they need to turn their body. This creates time. This breaks the flow. And that's one of my thoughts on it.
Yeah. He continues here. Let's see. I'm being set up to be yeah. So I think he's falling into these traps that people are setting for him, and they're following him. And that's probably the best advice, right? Is you break distance, as he said. We say you just disengage for a second, and yeah, don't necessarily go backwards. You can obviously go. In our parlance, we'd say go towards zone 3, their non-weapon arm. So like you said, if they're right-handed, you're going to their left side, right? Because that's going to make them have the larger arc to go through.
And as counterintuitive as it sounds, when you're moving to their non-weapon side, you're better served to move forwards to the angle than lateral to the angle. Because if you move lateral, you're opening up distance for both of you, so they can turn and go back to a neutral point. But if you move forward to the angle, you actually are lengthening their distance while shortening your distance.
Right.
Meaning you have a split second more time than they do. And sometimes that's all it requires in the fight.
It's true. Yep. That's one of the reasons for the circular footwork in the Bagua, which is you're never you're never doing, going completely lateral. You're always taking that curve. And so when you're always thinking about it, you're thinking as your opponent is in the middle of a circle. And then you can, cross that circle, or you're coming there. So you're always going to be going forward to them. Okie dokie.
And unfortunately, forward is a very difficult direction to move in a fight.
Yes. Especially when people first get started, it's very counterintuitive for them. Everybody wants to back up.
Homie has a sword. You want to get out of the way.
Yep. Exactly.
Back feels safe, but it's a lie.
Right. Well, then that's exactly the thing. I think one thing that was mentioned was as I think I'm about to win, and then boom, I don't. Right, and that's your problem. You think you're about to win, right? You never. The point's not over until it's over. Right? You keep going. You stay alert. Right? In our rule sets, you can do the salvo, which is after the initial hit, the other person can get another hit to get a higher score. Right? Which means even if you get hit, don't let your guard down. Keep it up. They might be coming for another, for another thing. And that's one thing that we, people do all the time too. So, yeah.
I tell my guys all the time, dying is a long ways from dead.
Yes. Very true. I have many stories that can prove that right. Let's see.
And I found an easy thing to do to kind of help out new students who want to go backwards is there are a million ways you can demonstrate it in a class, but that other guy is always going to be able to move forward a lot faster than you're going to be able to move backwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And the quicker you get that in your mind.
Yeah. One of the things that we do is we put them against the wall so they can't go backwards.
Yeah, we played the Mustafar game where they are on. There's no real footwork involved in it, but it's all balanced because those Bosu balls. They're like half.
I don't know.
Yeah, on top of there, and then you go there. You're trying to knock the other guy off.
Yeah.
That. It's because you can't get out of range. You're right there. You got to deal with it. You got to move it around you. But yeah, putting them up against the wall is a good one. Because even like out of bounds, people go out of bounds backwards, probably more times than any. And then oops, my foot went out of bounds. Why? Because I couldn't see behind me.
That's usually how I scored points whenever I was doing competition, because I was already a big guy. So a big guy kind of coming towards you makes you want to back up. And, that really worked until everyone else hit their growth spurts. But one thing I would like to bring up, and this is coming more from the choreographer standpoint than anything else, is that a lot of what's being discussed here from what I'm hearing, and a lot of things to keep in mind about this form is not unlike with any dueling, with any fight, really. It is your relation to your other opponent. Like it is, you are not in a vacuum by yourself responding to some hypothetical. You are in a situation with at least one other person. And you now have to think about what you are doing and what the other person is doing and what they could possibly doing and what you could possibly doing after that, or in reply, and vice versa. There's, and I'm not saying, you need to be able to do that all in like dead time. For a stage fight, every good fight kind of has like one of those moments of the fighter sizing each other up, like just like the quick flurry and then a break, or carefully poking at each other. Fighting games refer to this as playing footsies with one another. In an actual fight, you may have to, run those numbers in your head literally as the other person's coming with you. That is something that needs to be considered when, I feel like needs to be considered when discussing Form 5.
I actually have a drill that can help with that. It's a fun little game, and it's just sitting on a chair, sitting on the couch, whatever, and you and another person, you spell a small word. Every phrase of the fight, 6 to 8 actions between the two of you. So that's only 3 to 4 actions before somebody will get hit or you break distance. And you can spell a word with your partner while you're just talking. So, for instance, I'm going to talk with Ben about this, and I come up with a word, I give him the first letter, and then he gives me the next letter, and then I give him the letter that follows that. I had a word in mind, but the letter that he gave me may not go with the word I had, so I have to adjust my thinking to follow the letter he gave me. If you hesitate, you got hit. If you gave a letter that doesn't fit in that word, you got hit. If you complete a word, the two fighters broke, and now you can think. Then you can start another phrase of the fight.
I like that.
And it's a great way to practice it because the art of combat is not who's stronger, who's faster, who's bigger. It's really about who thinks first. And like language, there are rules. I know that a vowel will follow a consonant. I know that when he's in this kind of position, there's only certain things that he can do. And once I learn the rules, I then can get rid of all this extraneous stuff, these ideas, and now my thought process is much narrower. And I don't need to think as hard.
Yeah, that the language connection there obviously resonates with me. We did a similar thing in interpreting, because when you're learning how to interpret, you have to take things in and then be able to do that out. And there is a little bit of prediction in there, and a little bit of, being reactive to it. Neither of those two things, and I equate this a lot with fighting, neither of those things appear to happen in your conscious brain, right? I can interpret and come out of it and not tell you what it was about. I can go through, if I'm in a really good match or something like that, say, oh, what did you do just there? I don't know. My training, kind of comes through. Sure, I may, plan some things here and there, but like you said, the only real place you can really think is out of distance, right? When you're not in it. So, it's a strange line to walk.
A Italian fencing master. There's an Italian fencing master by the name of Salvatore Fabris, who wrote his manuscript in 1612. And he used the word to estimate. And if you get an estimate from a roofer, he can give you a correct estimate because he knows the cost of product, he knows the cost of time, he knows how much material, how many people, all this information. That's your training. I tell my guys, we never predict, we estimate from prior experience.
That's a good way of putting it. Definitely. Estimation. All right. We got a question here for you.
Prediction. Yes.
Question is, what is your favorite weapon to use and why?
I'd have to go with the longsword because that's what I started my career with. I've also gone over to Europe and fought in battle reenactments. overseas. So I was on the battlefield of Agincourt for the 600th anniversary, fighting with the English against the French. I fought in England. I fought with single-handed swords, hand-and-a-half swords, spears, and pole axes on the battlefield. And I got to say, my favorite for that is the longsword. But if I'm in more of a close quarters area, the side sword, the one-handed cutting sword, because that gives me the best of both worlds without too much space being taken up.
With or without buckler?
Usually without. When I'm fighting side sword, I prefer the buckler if I have a secondary weapon. If I'm fighting rapier, I can't stand using a buckler. I like using a dagger. But most often, I fight single sword by itself and then use my footwork to get behind my sword.
Right. Very good. Yes. Hopefully, I want to get recently they've, I don't know, discovered, but recently kind of resurrected Chinese buckler fencing from Han Dynasty era, which is what, 200 BC to
300 AD. Yeah.
380, something like that. Yeah. And they're really cool because they're just like a buckler. They're a little elongated. They got a spike on the top and they got two hooks on the top and the bottom. Yeah, they were used with very, very much in the, same way. So hopefully that will start getting spreading around there. All I know is that whenever I've used a shield, I go, man, I wish I always had a shield.
Yeah. One of my favorite combinations is Viking sword and shield.
That's probably very
it's almost more like boxing.
Yeah. Yes. It's kind of probably like how we do Dao and shield. We've got a round shield like that, and then just a single-handed Dao or saber. Short range, but you can get in there and. All right.
But going back to the question about my favorite sword, one of the reasons for the long sword is because it is so versatile. I can have a long sword, I can grab it in the middle half swording, and then I have basically a short spear. I can hold it by the blade and I've got a hammer or an axe. And if I hold it by the handle and I've got the rest of the handle and the pommel here, I have a dagger. So it gives me all these options.
Definitely. I also am a big fan of longsword. For me, I'm a bigger guy, so I can wield larger weapons. I like the length.
And the way Craig is swinging the tonfa around, once you learn about the longsword and the quillins, you can hook your thumb around the guard, and you can get that same kind of action with your sword.
That's true.
We have documentation in Fjore's manuscript about, like you're walking down the street and you get attacked, you don't have time to draw your sword. So how you use it while it's still in your scabbard.
Yeah. Yep.
Because unfortunately, the enemy doesn't always give you time to be ready.
No, not at all. That's what I'm always saying. Everybody's, people like to give you these instructions, like never turn your back on your opponent. It's like those are all ideal situations. Yes, I agree, but it's never ideal. So prepare for the unideal.
We do all our training in regular street clothes.
True. Yes.
So I wear boots all the time. So I train in boots. Because I need to be able to move in them.
Yep. We've got one that says, I'd still like to know if broad saber is good for Form 5. Broad saber is a term that is probably going to be defined a lot of different ways. If you're talking about a Dao, like a Chinese saber, which is also sometimes called a broadsword, I don't think it would necessarily be a, you know, there's any weapon or art that we would necessarily say is specifically good for Form 5. I think all of these forms kind of encompass universalities of combat and stuff. So, like we say, you're never going to fight with a form. You bring all of your skills to every encounter that you have. You can take these principles and apply them to different lengths of saber. Obviously, if you've learned a particular sword form, you can bring it over into that, no problem. That's the beauty of the lightsaber as an analog, is it can be at one time or in the space of a breath. You can be using a rapier, you can be using a longsword, you can be using a katana, right? And you don't have to change weapons. So I think, so he seems to be talking about just about a large two-edged sword, right? So a long sword.
Like a long sword.
Yeah. So, yeah, of course, yes, long sword stuff is something that's obviously very suitable for Form 5 stuff, because of everything that we've been talking about.
I was watching a video that you sent, and it was Darth Bane. Darth Bane,
Darth Bane,
who was, big guy, and used his strength and his stature all the time in his fights using Form 5. And with a long sword, or if it's too long, it's hard to get close enough. And then to use your structure, your stature as a tool. So I think having something that's too big, more like a lance or a spear, is going to be not as useful in this type of form. I may be wrong from what my research on it, but I think you excuse me. You want to have a weapon that's going to allow you to use that strength as well. Would that be correct assumption?
I would, I mean, it probably could be. The problem we have with the spear techniques in lightsaber is that shaft. You know, as soon as you put a lightsaber on the end of a stick, right? It's like, we can't. First of all, we can't make them that long. But even if they were, it's like, what's preventing us from just chopping the stick in half? So yeah, I mean, if you're coming from a spear type of thing, yeah, I mean, it's a different way of applying strength, definitely. And I guess it would also depend on what type of spear. If you're using like a Chinese military spear, which is like a 10-foot long.
Well, exactly. As soon as we have a military pike that's 3 or 4 meters long, it's the great equalizer. It does not matter how tall you are anymore.
No, you've now got the biggest thing on the thing, and it's not. Yeah, then those criteria kind of falls by the wayside. So, but yeah, I can tell you, like if you're using a sword that's too big for you, that can really screw you up, because they'll always kind of like be a little too close to you. But at least in my experience.
With my one-handed sword, my side sword, I actually prefer it very short. So I have a 29-inch blade. So it's extremely short compared to what most people use. But that's because I like to get in closer. If I'm too close to you, you can't develop the strength that you want.
Yep.
And your point will always move significantly faster than your hands. And if I can get closer to your hands, I have more time to work in.
Definitely. Yes. Another question here. If strength is overrated, is it a mistake to work towards improving athleticism as a saber practice? Did I misunderstand? I think maybe you did misunderstand a little bit. We didn't say that strength is overrated. What we're saying is it's not strength by itself, right? And that people's idea of what strength is perhaps a little different than what most people are thinking. We're really talking about athleticism, right? Your ability to make your body do what you want to do when you want to do it, right? And that takes athleticism. Is it good to be strong? Yes. Stronger is always better. But the type of strength that we're talking about is not one of maximal effort in your, in your limbs and stuff like that. But it's more of a, any type of sport where you're trying to relax into that motion, you're trying to get everything moving together so that you can conserve energy. All of that is going to be increased if you increase your athleticism. So I think that is probably the key point to what we're talking about with strength. Not that it's overrated, that it's misunderstood. Would that be, we agree about that?
Strength is a
Yeah, go ahead.
Strength is a tool.
Yes.
Strength is a tool, and it's an important tool. You can drive a nail with a hammer. You can drive a screw with a hammer, but you have to work really hard. It's much easier to put the screw in with the screwdriver. You can drive a nail with a screwdriver, but you have to work really hard. Mm-hmm. Understand each tool has its use. And you can make one tool fit almost any situation, but it's by far not the most effective tool.
Right. And also, if you're building a porch, you're going to use more than one tool.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yes. If you want to entertain on that deck. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've gotten through all of the questions here. Do we have anything we want to do to finish up the discussion here? Do we have anything to add? No? Okay. Well, I mean, obviously it's a large topic. It can go on forever, but we are limited here. I want to thank Stephen Fick for joining us here today. It was a great conversation. It was great to meet you. Hopefully we'll do some more stuff in the future.
Thank you so much for having me here. It was a pleasure to talk to you all.
Oh, no, it was great. It was great. Excellent. As always, good to see you, Craig. Ben, always good to see you. Everybody out there, thank you for joining us this evening. Have a great week. We will see you next time with the next form we're going to be going over, of course, is Niman, Form 6, but we might have a show or two in between that. So I'll get back to you on that one. So from all of us here at Terra Prime, happy sabering.
Thank you.
All right.